Greetings, everyone, and welcome back. We are here with the director of 8,000 Paper Clips, Nitzan Tal, and I want to welcome you and thanks so much for sharing your film and this time with us today.
Thank you.
This is a fantastic story of how one individual took his personal trauma in his life and turned that energy into a vehicle for positive change through his art, which is his therapy. I wanted to start off by asking you, how did you happen upon this incredible story and this very interesting individual, Rafael Lamas?
It all happened by chance. A person, another videographer I know in New York, who's a childhood friend of Rafael, contacted me, texted me one day. It was mid-November 2015, saying that a friend of his from Israel is looking for a videographer to travel to Uganda to document an art project. Of course, I was curious. I've never been to Africa. So a day later, I got on the phone to speak to Rafael, and he told me about the project, and he told me about the deported refugee children. And that really caught my attention, the children. He sent me some material. There was a TV show in Israel about the organization. And I was really intrigued. I just felt a real connection to the children, to what's happening to them. I did not at that point really understand what Rafael was attempting to do. I didn't really understand his project, his goal, what was going on, but I was ready to go and meet this group, the children. And by the time I realized that there's no budget, and actually Rafael was hoping that I'll be willing to pay my own way, I was already hooked and I decided to go.
Did you go into the project realizing was it more of a human rights and political story that you attracted to it, or was it just the kids, or was it more about the artist, or both? It sounds like you were unclear of what his project was. So
it was definitely from the human rights angle. That's something that I've always been interested in. And refugees, the issue of refugees has been something that I worked with before. I did still photography for an organization that works with refugees all over the world. So refugee rights are something that interested me for a while.
So then could you briefly give everyone some insight into your background and approach to filmmaking and your photography? Because I know you're a photographer, but you're also a filmmaker. And, you know, you mentioned these stories of refugees and human rights. Is all your work based on that topic, or what's your approach?
So I've been doing photography, still photography as a hobby for many years since I was in high school. And then I started when I arrived in New York and had access to ICP and other schools in the area. I started taking courses here and really got interested in documentary photography, still photography at that point. And I, through a website that doesn't exist anymore, an organization that was connecting non-profit organizations with photographers, I got to connect with a couple of non-profit philanthropies that work in Central and South America. And I traveled a couple of times, once to Guatemala and once to Ecuador, to photograph for those organizations. And actually through them, I got into filmmaking because at their request, I started recording videos, and I felt that I don't know enough about videos, so I started taking courses. But that's me. That's how I roll. I get
so it evolved.
something,
Yeah.
and I find a way to learn it. and I started learning about video, and from there to filmmaking, and that's where I am today.
Yeah, you're really you're great at it. So I guess that approach to filmmaking and these topics has to do with the name of your production company, which I think is Question Everything.
Yes.
That kind of like questioning authority and questioning everything.
It's question everything. Yeah, that's actually it's a name. When I established my company, I think my older son was 12 or 13 at the time, and we watched a documentary. I don't even remember the details, but there was some a high school club in some state, I think the Bible Belt, that called themselves Question Everything, and they were questioning everything and got in trouble with the school. And I loved the name. And a few months later, when I was looking for a name for my company, and I was talking to my family, and my son said, "Why won't you call it Question Everything? It's like you love this idea so much." I'm like, "Wow, brilliant! This is it."
Yeah, it's a great name. How many years did you work on 8,000 Paperclips?
I got involved in November of 2015, and we finished the main edit in November of 2019. So 4 years.
And how many times did you have to travel back and forth, I guess, on your own dime to Uganda and to South Sudan and to Israel to make it?
I've never been to South Sudan.
Oh, I thought that you had been there. Okay.
No, no. I traveled to Uganda twice. There was another, I got involved in the project when it was already ongoing. So
Oh, okay.
some of the footage from Uganda is from another photographer, a videographer that was there before I got involved. Um, and a couple of times to Israel, but I always combine it with family visits.
What happened to the other cinematographer? Did they walk away with their hands up in the air? Was it too crazy for them or what?
I think the no budget was the excitement was good for one trip, but that was as much as they were willing to work with no budget.
Yeah, because I saw somebody else's name on there. So what was Raphael like in person and to work with? If you could share some of those insights, because he seems to be kind of a big picture visionary guy, but I think a lot of it's in his head and things sort of sprout off and branch this way and that way, and he follows through and he does these amazing things. But I mean, how much, what was it like?
It wasn't easy. So as you say, he has a lot of ideas, and surprisingly, he does follow through. From the first phone conversation, I got a little concerned because I mean, he had grand plans, but there were so many details that he didn't know. I was trying to ask him about like what kind of transportation, because I always have to be concerned with the equipment. I travel with like tripod and two cameras and audio equipment. I travel by myself, so I do everything by. There's no like a production company and that's me. And a lot of the transportation over there was on a boda, which is motorcycles for hire.
Oh, boy.
So I was really concerned on where are we gonna sleep, where are we gonna stay, where are we gonna film, and he really had no idea. He's like, I have this connection, Yoash, it's a village. So that was my first trip, was to the Abu Yudaya, the Jewish community.
Uh-huh.
Have this connection, Yoash, she's gonna set us up, it's gonna be okay. And I was really concerned. I called back the guy that introduced us, and I'm like, Eli, tell me the truth. Is Rafael gonna follow through? Am I gonna go all the way to Uganda and not? He's like, oh, don't worry about it. This guy, if he wants to do something, he'll be there and do it.
Awesome.
okay, I'm going. And I didn't have that much time to prepare. We were talking mid-November, and he wanted to go the first week of December because it was Hanukkah, and he wanted to do the candle lighting, and the children at the Jewish community had a week off, which worked well to do renovations at the school. So I didn't have that much time to prepare. Maybe that's a good thing because I might have changed my mind otherwise.
So did he have a vision of how he wanted the film to play out, or was that all your editing?
Not at all. At that point, there was no, there, we didn't even talk about the film. Everything he does, he documents, he wanted to document it. And that was my role over there. Later on, he asked me if I will edit a film when the Paperclip House was invited to be presented in San Diego at the
Right.
New Americans Museum. He asked me if I'll be willing to edit a short film that will talk about where the sculpture came from. And I did that. And when I was working on that, I felt that there was so much more. I just wanted to tell more about that, which it wasn't the place, but that's when I decided that I want to delve into the whole question of the value of art and art as a healing mechanism and all the other questions that the film raises. So that was
Right.
my idea, and that was no. He did not have. He cooperated and we collaborated, but the film, in terms of the story and the question and everything, that's mine.
Yeah, the reason why that came to mind right away was you mentioned getting there in order to film Hanukkah. And so yeah, it looks like you filmed the different pieces because that ends up later on in the film.
Yes.
And that's just why it came to mind. It's interesting about his visionary thinking because he sees the paper clips as a metaphor for connecting. And like, I don't know who would have ever thought of that, but it all makes sense. And that seems to be what he does throughout the entire film. He's constantly making connections, and I almost wonder how much of it's just spontaneous or he knew right along that he was going to make connections to the point where these Christian kids who speak Hebrew go into a community, and as their older teenagers start teaching other teenagers and Jewish teenagers and children how to speak Hebrew because they don't know how to speak it. And it was just crazy how that connection's even made later on in the film.
Mm-hmm. I think with Raphael, it's a combination of the two things. He has plans. He plans ahead a lot of things. He has a lot of ideas. Like when we were going to the Jewish community, he knew he wanted to do Hanukkah, and knew he wanted to do the Hebrew teaching. But the renovation of the school, the signs, some of the other things were just things that evolved on the spot because he saw the need and he had an idea. And sometimes also, and I think it's something that a lot of artists do, they make up kind of reasonings and meaning in retrospect. I think a lot of times things work out in a certain way, and all of a sudden an artist would say, "Oh, of course, it means this and it means that." And no offense to the art world, but I think that things work that way sometimes, and I see it in my own work sometimes. Sometimes I do something for a certain reason, or just because it works out that way, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh wow, wait, that actually really fits in with the theme of this or that.
I think that for him it's probably almost a magic of discovery, and one door opens and it opens to another one, and it's kind of that's the way he likes to live his life. But, he says he doesn't wake up every morning figuring out, can he do some good? And he's not a social worker, but he's just on this quest to explore. And it seems to evolve into these opportunities that he creates. And, I couldn't really tell if that was true or not, or or if it's all spontaneous or it's planned. And, I think you answered the question there.
Yeah, I think with him it's a lot about the connections, more about the connections than about doing good. I mean, he does a lot of different projects. Some of them involve helping other people find their creativity, but not all of them.
Yeah.
I
Did
think connecting to different people is definitely something that he enjoys, that helps him and maybe helps others also.
did he say why he chose to make these curtains, or did that organically happen? Was it always going to be a framed house, or did he really didn't know when he was getting there? Because he chose a material that created no boundaries for the kids who are working with it. And as you saw, the roof looks kind of like almost like shingles, but the walls are all over the place. So they just made it up as they went along. Was it always supposed to be a framed house like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was his original idea, was to make some kind of a frame and make some kind of a wall or roof with a paper clip. That was the extent that he presented the idea to the children. But he allowed them, they collaborated on the design, and he allowed them to plan the walls, the paper clips as they wanted. And he does mention somewhere in the film that he imagined it as a house, and they actually build it as almost like a hallway, like a corridor.
Right.
Which surprised him. He did not. That's not something that he planned. But then he said, you know what? It makes sense, because for refugees, maybe that's what a house is. It's something that you go through. You don't really. I mean, to this day, most of them don't really have a permanent home.
Right. He mentions in San Diego that they're just passing through. And then the doors had um, kind of a decoupage of immigration papers from the U.S. of very famous people who had immigrated over the years. So was that the idea of the architectural students?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
He asked them to design doors, and they came up with the idea. Yeah.
That I thought that was really cool how that was added in. That was really interesting. So he saw himself really in these children, and I mean, it's almost like he had lost hope, and when he was clinically depressed, and I guess he figured that they had really lost hope.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, he definitely sees art as a way of bringing back hope and dealing with trauma.
Right. Yeah, and those stories that Ronaldo's description are so graphic of what he endured during the Civil War. And he said it was like dreaming because it's so unbelievable. And then Christina was subjected to, unconscionable life-altering trauma that I don't know if she'd ever recover from what she saw happen to her friend. Um, and it's interesting that but then you take Israel, and Israel kicked them out of the country. And even though these kids look like they're ultimately going to become leaders because of Raphael's efforts, I think if maybe they'd stayed in Israel, they would have become more educated and open to going back to their country. But also, it sounded like they didn't want to go back to their country. But then they come to the realization, like, hey, it's important I'm here. I can make a change.
Yeah. So I think many of them are on a path to really to do well, to the graduating high school now, the older ones, they're going on to university. Actually, I've been texting with Victoria all day because I'm sponsoring her to go to university. And actually just yesterday, she was told that they're going to go back to live. She was studying online, so there was a lot of things to organize for that. So I think, yes, some of them really grew out of the experience, but not everybody. For example, Veronica and Tedo, their brother and sister that are in the film,
Right.
they both have some learning disabilities. They got a very good support in Israel and were gonna graduate high school in Israel, and they were not able to pick it up in Uganda because the support over there for learning disabilities just doesn't exist, and they dropped out. They're still, I mean, they're fine. They're in Egypt with their family, but I think they would have done much better if they stayed in Israel.
Huh. You know, it's interesting how Raphael is torn when he realizes the cost of moving the sculpture and measuring whether the money could be used for better purposes to school and support the children. And had he really been grappling with that, or was that a question that he hadn't really thought about?
I think he has. I mean, it's something he's always questioning himself, and he's always questioning everything that he's doing from very different angles. And one angle that is pretty obvious, especially when you're there and you see how everything is very tight and how money, I don't know if he even thought about it that much before he got there, but once he was there and he realized that there's so much need, I think he grappled with it, and at the end of the day, I think what he told himself is that he's at a certain capacity as an artist, and he's raising his money or his volunteers where he can find them, and other people are supporting the children in other ways. And he says, look, from his project, other things came out because the film is bringing more attention to the project, not to mention that I've been involved, and I since then been helping the organization with fundraising videos and Yoash's school. We actually, from the material I filmed over there, we created a GoFundMe to build them a borehole, a water well. So good things happen from everything. The project, things develop. So you do one thing and other things happen.
Yeah, that's great.
To measure exactly the results of one project.
I wanted to speak about the maker space for the Syrian refugees in San Diego. It looked like Raphael took Abdullah under his wing, almost like an intern or a journeyman or something, working with him on his wood sculptures. And in doing so, kind of transferring Raphael's talents for connecting the community to Abdullah. So how was Abdullah received as an artist? I mean, did this help launch him in a direction with his community as a leader in any way?
I don't know. I haven't been in contact. I know that while the project was going on, Abdullah, like Charlene says in the film, you could see a very significant transformation in him, in how he carried himself, in how he interacted with other people. when I was there, he did not yet learn English. So all the communication with him was through a translator. So it was hard for me to have meaningful conversations with him. I think Rafael and him just connected over the art and with a hand motion because Rafael doesn't speak Arabic either. Um, but I think it created a very interesting connection between the Jewish community and the Syrian refugee community, and that's by itself I think has value.
It's interesting, or it's amazing how these two men had an email or Skype correspondence, which turned into this project, which continued to have this positive effect for years to come, with so many individuals and the potential for creating future leaders of South Sudan. And I think the kids are actually realizing that, actually, I think in the film, one of them says it, or somebody mentions it. It might have been that minister that, this is what may come out of, what this one individual's done. And of course, is it Yoshi, his name, who started, pardon me?
Which one? Yoash?
Yoash, rather, who started that community. And it sounds like, getting these different groups together, who are Muslims, Christians, Jews, giving them the tools to coexist, and it just creates such a huge world down there that probably hadn't existed. Did you feel that after the project with the Sudanese kids and the Syrian refugees that he had achieved some of the goals he established when he turned 50? Because that's kind of how this started to roll out, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, I think, that's been an ongoing, fairly significant project for him. Rafael does have other art projects that he works on, and sculptures and shows. But I think the 8,000 paper clips and everything else that came out of it, the refugee artist in residence and everything, was a significant part of his plan. He just turned 58 this month. So yeah, I think it was a very significant step for him, this project.
Did you see any of his other sculptures? I mean, you were in his shop, but I don't know where they all are. I saw the still images, and they're very interesting because a lot of them have sort of this brokenness, not connected feeling. And yet he's this fella who is really teaching connectiveness, and trying to connect people and all the dots. And are all of his works like that?
So he has a methodology that he developed actually in the years following his mental breakdown. He works a lot with wheels, agricultural wheels, and chairs. And in both instances, he takes an existing object and transforms it. And one of his ideas, the way he expresses it, he says, he breaks them down or deforms them, and at the same time builds them back into something else. And he says it's the same way, like when he had a breakdown, he built himself at the same time. So that's his symbolism, and that's a big part of his work, of his artistic work, is based on that idea.
Yeah, I thought there had to be a connection like that because it seems like they were deconstructed and reconstructed, but they're really interesting. Yeah, so he didn't build those chairs from scratch. He deconstructed some chairs and reassembled them in that way. That's and the wheels. Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, your documentary is really tight. It's 60 minutes. It's packed with lots of information, but you know, it moves along at a comfortable rate. The soundtrack's awesome. I mean, to achieve this, there must have been a lot left on the proverbial cutting room floor. I know this was all done digitally. Were there any stories that you left out that you thought were important to share that you just said, there's not enough time, I can't leave it in the film?
Wow, there's a lot. There's a lot of little snippets and little interview uh, sentences, just things that were really interesting. But yeah, it's, I mean, some of the children's stories, because there were a lot more stories, and we had to decide which ones to include. Some of them were really touching. I had one interview that didn't make it into the film, one story, because it was very long. Um, but one of the girls, Irene, told me how when they were informed that they can go to the school in Uganda, they had to travel by bus, just her and three sisters, all the way from some remote village in South Sudan. And they got lost on the way, and one of the girls was really sick, and she went to look for a doctor and couldn't find her way back. And they stayed in some place that was like a hostel for men, and it all sounded so scary. And I kept thinking, I mean, these are children that grew up most of their lives in Israel, in a very Western country, and all of a sudden they need to find their way around Africa. And I kept thinking back to my son, who's about the same age as that girl. And we ended the interview, and I burst out crying. And I'm like, this 16-year-old is trying to console me, and I'm just crying. I just, I just couldn't, I just couldn't handle it. It was a bit embarrassing. And then, of course, I left the camera on, and my editor heard the whole thing. That's
Oh,
embarrassing again, but yeah, it was just very, very touching. A lot of different stories. We had to decide which ones to include. We didn't wanna, we didn't want the film to be kind of like a tear-jerking story of horrible refugee encounters, because the films like that have been made and are important, but
right.
wasn't our point. So we chose very carefully what to include and what not. Um, but yeah, that was.
I think it's very balanced, and it tells a great story about it. You know, the emphasis wasn't just on his artwork. It showed what he was capable of doing, how he entered that artist arena as art therapy, essentially. But at the same time, you know, you really gave a taste of everything, and you showed how desperate things are with these kids when they get back to the country. And some of them, was it Victoria, I believe, hadn't even been to South Sudan before, or one of the kids said that they hadn't ever been there,
Most of them, some of them left South Sudan as very young
or
children.
they don't remember it.
Yeah, I think Victoria was born in Sudan, in North Sudan, in Khartoum, and they went to Egypt when she
Yeah.
was 4.
Okay.
Were very young when the families left Sudan. Yes.
Yeah, Victoria, I get that sense that she's going to be a real leader. It's interesting that you said you were just in communication and you're sponsoring her. She sounds really cool and like she's going to be a real powerhouse to help her country.
Hmm.
So I want to thank you very much for sharing all this information about the film and making the film. This is a film I think that every student in high school and college should watch. This is the kind of film that would make the world a better place because people can see what's going on, you know, firsthand in the rest of the world. And so keep making powerful movies like this. I think it's really important, Nitzan. So,
Thank you very much.
all right. Well, thanks for spending this time with us today. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. You too.